Hi, I'm Dan Ahlers. I'm running for United States Senate, and with me today is Taneeza Islam. She is an immigration lawyer and also the Executive Director for South Dakota Voices for Peace and Justice. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk a little bit about immigration. Certainly a problem that we face as a country with many, many facets. So tell me a little bit about the challenges that we face in our country with immigration.
Well, immigration, the system for immigration laws and policies has always been a broken system. But now that's just been exacerbated by executive orders over executive orders that have really just put larger dents into the system by halting certain people coming in and out of our country, by halting some of the orders that were in place previous to this administration. So it causes a lot of stress and anxiety on people who are already here and then have to figure out how to deal with executive orders all the time coming out of the White House.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the misnomers about documented and undocumented immigrants in the United States that's fueling the president on his executive orders and making it difficult for Congress to act?
Sure. I mean, there's so many misnomers and stereotypes and misinformation. I think one of the largest is understanding what undocumented means. As a civil rights advocate and an immigration attorney, I do not use the words illegal aliens. These are people, and if they do something unlawful, it's unlawful. Like if we go over the speed limit, we get a speeding ticket, we don't become illegal people. And so it's really important to understand from a human rights perspective that we call them undocumented people. But the biggest misunderstanding about undocumented people is the overwhelming majority. I believe it's like 70% of undocumented people in our country today actually came into our country lawfully. We have what's called a visa system. So there's different categories of permissions of what you can do. So you can come as a visitor, go to Mount Rushmore, see the falls, and then you gotta leave within 30 days or 90 days, for example. Or you can come on a fiancé visa, where you can be here for 90 days, but if you don't get married, then you gotta leave. Well, so what happens is there's really no enforcement mechanism on people leaving when they're supposed to. So visa overstays are technically undocumented people because they're not here lawfully, but they continue to stay here and maybe settle here or maybe start working and so on, and life happens.
So what you're saying here is that these people that have come here legally have fallen through the cracks for a system that's already broken, and we don't have anything in place to accommodate that or to solve that problem.
There's no enforcement mechanism on that. And I think the big stereotype is that people who are undocumented are just crossing our borders and that we need a border wall to keep them on. Well, that's completely false. Because if you look at the statistics and data, the overwhelming majority of undocumented people actually came into our country lawfully. So if people really wanted to curtail undocumented people staying here, it would be to create some sort of enforcement mechanism so people don't overstay their visa.
They also bring value to our workforce. I know one of the other misnomers about many of these immigrants that have come into the United States undocumented is that they are unskilled. But I know here in South Dakota, that's really a different story, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not just undocumented immigrants who are working. There's actually legal immigrants who are working, and there are some visa categories that are just to work. So for example, in South Dakota, we have large number of agricultural temporary workers. That's a very specific visa. So the employer has to fill out paperwork for these people to come seasonally. And when that season's done, they gotta leave so that they can come back lawfully, right? So they don't have that visa overstay and accrue unlawful days, essentially, on their accrual recs. So in a state like South Dakota, where data shows us that our population is dying quicker than it's growing, how do we grow a state? how do we even stabilize the population? Well, the only answer is immigration, because people are not going to move here from Chicago to work in a dairy farm. Immigrants and refugees, which is another category of immigration, are coming here for a better life and to work, and they may be low-skilled to very high-skilled. Another issue with high-skilled immigrant and refugee populations is they don't necessarily have the equivalent testing. So for example, if you have a foreign-born doctor who comes to the United States and they had been practicing in India for 30 years as a physician, but for whatever reason wanted to come to the United States and practice, they would have to take all the exams over again that a new graduate from medical school would be taking. So we have a large population of highly skilled immigrants in our community that can't work those same jobs because there are not those equivalency testings available for their career paths.
That's really interesting. And I know as a former state legislator that a lot of these immigrants are filling jobs that we wouldn't normally be able to fill. I hear that they're stealing American jobs, but that's not really true because we have more jobs available in South Dakota than we have people to fill them. Even with all the immigrants that we have now, we can't fill jobs. And our ag community benefits greatly from those immigrants, whether it be the Karen population in Huron or a lot of the African immigrants that work at Morels or any other number of farms, dairy farms around the state. So what can we do? What do we need in Congress to make things work? What type of people do we need at the table? And what does Congress really need to do in order to make immigration reform happen?
Well, I think what you're doing is great, Dan, because it's really talking to the experts in the field and understanding what it means to be here and to be able to have access to being able to work and have a better life. And so, there's so many different categories of immigrants. For example, the most threatened, I would say, immigrant population in our country in this moment are DACA recipients. So these are children who were brought by their parents who are unlawful. And so they've never had legal status, but they might be in their 20s or 30s. So in the previous administration, DACA, or they're commonly known as Dreamers, were allowed to get Social Security cards and a pathway to working and higher education. Well, that's stuck in the Supreme Court right now. This current administration said that that wasn't done lawfully, and they want to strip over 800,000 people of a status, which allows them to have a better life. And so again, we started in 2017 with what's commonly referred to as the Muslim travel ban. And so we have 9 major countries where people are not allowed to immigrate from. We've also seen the lowest numbers in U.S. history of allowing refugees who are fleeing persecution and war and devastation to come to our country for having safety and for a better life. So there's so many different facets. It's really important to talk to the experts, understand the state's economy and what the needs are, and develop a more comprehensive system of immigration.
And they're already contributing. It's not like they're not contributing or they're drained to society either. A lot of these immigrants are paying Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare taxes. They're already helping support a system that without them may not be sustainable. And is it really realistic or cost effective to try to deport 11.2 million people?
No, it's not. And you're correct in saying that it's both undocumented workers and legal workers that pump money into our social safety nets that we have in the United States that our grandmas are benefiting from right now, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all of those programs. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's probably trillions and trillions of dollars that some of these folks will never see when they're retirement aged. So the economic impact of deporting 11 million people, it just doesn't even make sense. like it's pretty laughable, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think it costs like $11,000 a person to deport an immigrant. And also, I think just in the last couple of years, they contributed $13 trillion to Social Security, but only received $13 billion, and only received $1 billion in benefits.
Yeah.
And that is pretty astounding. That's they're really doing a lot to help pay for my parents in their retirement, my grandparents, your grandparents, and they're, the people that are coming in are of a younger age, correct?
I believe so. I think the trends show that. I think another really important issue to understand is also understanding what is happening at the border right now. The people we're seeing, the populations that we're seeing come to our US-Mexico border are something we haven't ever seen in our history, which are families and children fleeing devastation and war in Central America to be here. Something a lot of people don't know about is that there's over 500 unaccompanied minors from Central America that live here in South Dakota. And so that means that they've traveled by themselves without a parent or guardian. When they come to the border, they're put into detention centers, jails, essentially, until they identify a sponsor that they can live with until their immigration court proceedings. So at Voices for Peace, we're the only organization in South Dakota that's providing free legal services to these kids. And so the devastation we're seeing at the border, in my humble opinion, is more of a foreign policy issue than it is an immigration issue.
Not just a foreign policy, but humanity. It's a human rights crisis. And if we're going to do more about that, we need to be going to the source, those countries that have that type of corruption, have that type of violence, and be willing to do something about it. Shutting off our border isn't going to stop that flow of people.
Absolutely, and it makes our hemisphere of the world more unsafe if we close our borders and not allow people who are looking for refuge in our country to come in. You know, that refugee process can be really confusing for people who don't understand it. But currently, the process is if you're fleeing country A to country B, you're considered a refugee because of persecution, and there's 5 categories that you have to fit into to be designated a refugee. And you can only be designated a refugee by the UNHCR. The UNHCR doesn't exist here on our side of the hemisphere. That's why these folks who are coming, fleeing violence and persecution from Central America don't qualify as refugees. So there's a lot of technicalities, and again, the need for experts to be at the table when elected members are making these really crucial decisions on how to build a comprehensive system.
So to kind of finish this off, we have a Congress now that is unable to get things done, unwilling to address this issue. So what type of leaders do we need to elect?
We need leaders who will listen to advocates, who will listen to community leaders, who will listen to the experts to really understand what the issues are. And we need elected officials who can work across the aisle to really invest in a comprehensive immigration reform for the betterment of this country economically, but also from a human rights perspective. I mean, if we are truly the richest nation in the world, then we should be accepting a lot more refugees to have a better life in our country.
Taneeza, thank you very much for coming down here and sharing your story with me, sharing the story of so many immigrants in this country.
Thanks for having me.